following program contains language and subject matter that you may consider unsuitable for children. Parental discretion is advised.
Greetings, Earthling. His Highness the Jackal.
I'm going to pass the reins to Mr. Jackal, the new king of radio.
I think Jackal's Rubino. I'm not sure, but he'll give it to you good.
The Jackal.
Today we had the, just amazing whistleblower that's come forward to expose the Biden crime family. And I didn't think we were going to see this, but it's happening. And yes, they're exposing a lot here. But I want you to see something on a clip here that I took out of the initial press Congress hearing that's going on right now. It's not really a press Congress, but out of the hearing that's going on now. You guys got to see this. Miss Lee, okay, I don't know why they had her speak. She has nothing to do with this. This is not a race case. This is Hunter and Joe Biden in their crime syndicate and their crime family being exposed to the world for what it is. Okay, we know that 2020 was a rigged election. We know that they've been lying to us about the laptop and all kinds of stuff. This is stuff we know about. But now you have to watch how the left keeps covering for the big guy, for Joe Biden. And Ms. Lee does an excellent job of doing just that. And what I mean by that is, we're talking about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, right? They're both white. Donald Trump is also white. This has nothing to do with black people in any way, shape, or form. But Miss Lee, who is an African-American black lady, and a very, how can I say this, racist black woman against white men. Every time she's on camera, it's about dropping the race card. I'm Latino, and I hate when anybody drops the race card when it's not appropriate. And this might have just ended her career politically. It also accidentally exposes what we're saying about Joe Biden. And then to follow that, I believe the guy's name is Rafkin or Rafkin or something like that. He wears a bandana. He follows up by thanking her for a completely biased, racist rant, which again has nothing to do with what's going on in the video, in the actual whistleblower testimony. But he cites something that happened decades ago where there was a rape and the suspects were black. They were arrested, and Trump was asked. Now, mind you, he wasn't a politician. He wasn't President Trump. He was just a rich entrepreneur in New York. And they proposed the question to him, what does he think should happen? And he said, rapists should get the death penalty. And if these guys raped her, they should get the death penalty. Since then, the individuals have been proven to be innocent. But it's funny that these leftists like to bring up the past statements of a young Donald Trump, but they seem to forget that Joe Biden was also once much younger, made even more racially divisive comments, and they defend that man like it's all good. A guy who even during the presidential race in 2020 made racially divisive comments. Now, how does Miss Lee get away with this bullshit? You tell me.
I want to know what you thought the FBI agent was inferring. What did you think? What do you think when you read that, when you heard that, of the relationship between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and his business transactions when he is still in office?
Yeah, so I can't go
beyond what you've quoted me as saying in my testimony. So I just leave it there.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Ziegler, on page 104 of yours, you mentioned that Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, attempted to obtain a business tax deduction on his return for hotel rooms that were used by his father, Joe Biden. Tell us about that, please.
So yeah, on his tax return, he deducted a hotel room for his dad, so Joe Biden, and we actually got the invoice from the hotel that showed the dad's name on it.
So for that to be a valid business deduction, he would have to be doing business with Hunter Biden. Is that not true?
So we would a typical part of the process would be to interview that person to find out what you had, or what might have happened. Why did you go to that hotel room? And based on statements he made in his book, I mean, you can correlate to what was kind of going on around that time.
But how does it become a valid business deduction if Joe Biden's just there on vacation?
Generally speaking, to be a valid business deduction, it would have to be some type of business activity being conducted at that time. And
the last one is the WhatsApp. And I won't get into it because we're just about out of time, but I would just say the WhatsApp where he says my dad's sitting next to me, and you remember that, and that's on, I want to say, page 105. That's where you talk about it, Mr. Ziegler, and page 105 of your transcript. I guess the question there is, how would you be able to determine whether those rooms, whether he was actually next to Hunter Biden? How would you be able to determine that?
And the gentleman's time's expired, but you can please answer the question.
So typically in that situation, you'd want to get location data, contemporaneous data that would show where that person's at. So that's what we would typically look to.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Very good. Chair now recognizes Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Republicans have been invoking this term two-tier system of justice a lot recently. So I want to talk about what the real two-tier justice system is, where black and brown people are over-criminalized and over-incarcerated. On June 20th, Chairman Comer claimed in a committee press release, quote, the Department of Justice's charges against President Biden's son, Hunter, reveal a two-tier system of justice. From this, as you see or have seen from the knockoff social media site, former President Trump has also used this phrase in connection with the Hunter Biden investigation. I'd like to address the way my Republican colleagues are attempting to co-opt the phrase two-tier justice system to make it sound like Trump and his cronies are somehow the victims here, when the reality is that the term two-tier system of justice is meant to refer to the very real system that exists in the United States and which affects black and brown folks, not powerful former presidents and their political allies. The real two-tiered system of justice is one in which, in 2021, according to the DOJ's Bureau of Justice Statistics, the imprisonment rate for black men aged 18 and 19 was 11.6 times the rate for white males. The real two-tiered justice system is one in which, in 2021, according to those same statistics, the imprisonment rate for Native American males aged 18 and 19 was 5.1 times the rate for white males. The two-tier justice system is one in which, according to a May 2018 Vera evidence brief, and I quote, black men comprise about 13% of the male population, but about 35% of those incarcerated. 1 in 3 black men born today can expect to be incarcerated in his lifetime, compared to 1 in 6 Latino men and 1 in 17 white men. The two-tiered justice system is one in which an analysis of nearly 100 million traffic stops across this country found that black drivers were about 20% more likely to be stopped than white drivers. My Republican colleagues seem to think that using criminal law as a weapon or a political tool is objectionable only when directed against someone who should be out of reach of the criminal system, someone too rich, too powerful, or too white to be charged. But let's face it, that same system has been used as a weapon and a political tool against black people since the Emancipation Proclamation. These racial disparities are rooted in a two-tiered view on race. The belief that black people were inferior, that was created to justify the enslavement of black people, which has now evolved to include the belief that black people are more prone to criminality. During the decades of lynchings that followed enslavement, white people defended the torture and murder of black people as necessary to protect property, families, and a way of life from black criminals. In the 1980s, Nixon's war on crime evolved into Reagan's war on drugs, and we saw harsher and more frequent punishments and the start of mass incarceration. In both cases, it was black people who were targeted and suffered under those policies. There's a reason that crack cocaine, which carries a stereotype of being used by black people, was at one point punished far more harshly than powder cocaine. Prior to 2010, that ratio was 100-1, meaning someone convicted in a federal court of possessing crack cocaine will receive the same sentence as someone who possessed 100 times more powder cocaine. And I want to say that PA's extreme sentencing practices have overwhelmingly impacted people of color, but most specifically black people, who make up less than 11% of the population in Pennsylvania, but more than 65% of those serving life without parole sentences, and 58% of those serving non-life sentences of 20 years or longer. How many times have our elected officials and judges ran on a promise of a tough on crime approach? Even now, Republicans still tout that they are the party of law and order, while in the same breath claiming that Donald Trump should not be prosecuted. Don't get it twisted. Republican efforts to use the term two-tier justice is to distract from those who are truly the victims of a disparate treatment in our criminal justice system. And whether we say it out loud or not, we all know who those people are. I yield the remainder of my time to the ranking member.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, for that very eloquent statement. I wonder if you remember, you might be too young for this, but when there was this horrific assault, a gang rape in Central Park, Donald Trump ran ads in the New York Times saying that the Central Park suspect should be given the death penalty, and of course they turned out to be completely innocent of the offense. So I think that's just to reinforce your point. There's a history of profound racism in the criminal justice system and in the rhetoric around it, and there's something very disappointing about our colleagues co-opting, as you say, and prostituting the critique of the system as two-tiered on behalf of Donald Trump. I yield back to you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Groffman from Wisconsin for 5 minutes.
We must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society. And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point. That's the sad truth. I'm the guy that said, Rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it, notice it, and even when we notice it and we know it occurs, we don't know why. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. That's why in our system, the federal system, you serve 85% of your time. It's a shame, but we don't know how to rehabilitate. But there is a consensus, and I will cease. A, we must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it. But they are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist, and we must deal with that.
So 25 years after the 1994 crime bill was enacted, we are still having conversations about the import and significance of the bill.
That 1994 crime bill, it did contribute to mass incarceration in our country.
It's important that people remember the context of the political environment in the early 1990s.
The other big piece of legislation on Capitol Hill tonight is the crime bill.
Now, violent crime peaked in 1991, and the drafters of the bill didn't know that in 1993 and 1994 when they were drafting and signing it. Urban areas, urban cities across the country were ravaged by crack cocaine, and Americans were afraid of crime. The 1994 crime bill was signed by President Bill Clinton. This was a pretty significant bill at the time, and President Clinton and Senator Biden at the time were right that the bill was significant.
The most significant federal effort to deal with violent crime in America that has ever been undertaken.
It was important for a Democrat at the time to be seen as taking a significant role in trying to reduce crime and violence in the United States. And at the time, the Congressional Black Caucus was part of the debate around the crime bill. And the Congressional Black Caucus didn't want every provision that was included in this bill. It became clear that the provisions in the 94 crime bill were going to be a political compromise. And so the history is much more complicated than is sometimes portrayed by the media. Now, what did the bill do? Just like a lot of political compromises, there was the good and there was the bad. For example, the bill eliminated 19 types of semi-automatic assault weapons. It also provided huge amounts of funding to hire cops. 100,000 cops were funded. It was about $14 million at the time for community policing. The bill also enacted the Violence Against Women Act that provided funding to protect women and victims of domestic violence and crimes against women. But the most pernicious provision of the 1994 crime bill was its $12 billion that was authorized for states across the country that would enact what's called truth in sentencing laws. That funding literally paid states to increase the number of prison beds that they allocated for individuals convicted of violent crime in this country to serve 85% of their sentences behind bars. The reason that provision is so important and the reason we're still talking about it today is the federal government essentially subsidized states across the country to build more prisons. So 25 years later, the crime bill is being debated.
You stood up and used that tough on crime, phony rhetoric. That bill was a huge mistake.
There's no question that that crime bill contributed to America's mass incarceration problem.
1994 crime bill, we had a gigantic epidemic in America of violence, particularly in African American communities. The notion was overwhelmingly supported. It was supported by the Black Caucus.
United States. And at the time, the Congressional Black Caucus was part of the debate around the crime bill. And The Congressional Black Caucus didn't want every provision that was included in this bill to incarcerate more people, given the devastating consequences we know that incarceration causes. But at the time, policymakers felt the need to respond to what they felt was uncontrolled violence, and this bill was the way that policymakers, that Congress could say, or do something about it.
Violent crime and the fear it provokes are crippling our society. The crime bill before Congress gives you a chance to do something about it, a chance to be tough and smart.
We need to examine the crime bill and all of the federal bills that galvanized prison spending, that galvanized more arrest, more incarceration, and we need to look to the future. And today, the United States leads the world in terms of incarceration. In fact, if each state were its own country, 23 states would have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Any candidate running for election who's serious about criminal justice reform, who's serious about cutting the prison population by 50%, needs to take a hard look at what has worked and hasn't worked in terms of our past criminal justice policies, and understand that federal funding to increase the number of beds in prisons across the country is simply not a way.
Well, there you have it, folks. You saw it for yourself. That woman there, Miss Lee, is Looney Tunes. I mean, I don't understand this. How do you turn this whistleblower into something that has nothing to do with this, into a race issue? Not only that, she speaks about black men smoking crack. Well, Hunter Biden loves crack. And he was just in the White House, and they found cocaine in the White House during the time he was there. Now, I'm not saying it was his cocaine. I'm just saying it's awfully convenient that when there's crack cocaine, Hunter Biden, it's not that far behind. So, Miss Lee, you just exposed the Biden family for being cokeheads, for leading black men into prisons and out of black homes. You just exposed yourself as a racist and somebody who doesn't know her history. And that guy with the bandana, Rafkin, or whatever your name is, you sure are a complete left-hard moron. And yeah, you exposed your idiotic mind also in a very short clip. This is amazing, this whistleblower coming forward and testifying to the truth about the Biden crime family. With that said, folks, thanks for checking out the video. Like always, hit the notification button, subscribe to my channel, and if you have any comments or questions, leave them below. And please, make sure you vote people like Miss Lee out of here. We don't need any more racial division and people like her running race cards into things that has nothing to do with race. This is white Joe Biden and white Hunter Biden and the tier of justice that she knows is being used in this country against ex-President Donald Trump, who they're trying to destroy because he wants to make America great again and keep America first. Till next time, guys, see you soon, and you know what to do. Mega 2024. Peace.